Hello, everybody. Welcome to our ITpreneurs COBIT5 Foundation, the Gary Hardy Approach webinar. We'll start now. I see that a lot of people are still signing on. We have a little introduction, so that's fine. My name is Lawrence Gunneweg. I'm a COBIT product manager at ITpreneurs. We develop COBIT study materials, training materials. And I would like to start by thanking you all for joining this webinar. We always intend to bring you the best training experience and the highest results, of course. So we figured it might be a good idea to explain how we do that. And our goal of this session is to introduce you to our new COBIT5 Foundation materials and also to explain the rationale behind the design, of course. To keep it interactive, we'll drop a few polls every now and then, also to see, how you're thinking about this subject, and which will help us to better adjust the presentation to you. And if you have questions, just ask them in the toggle menu on the right of the webinar tool. It's very easy. We may save them up for the end, but if they're really related to this subject at that time, then I'll break in and ask Gary the question directly. All right. Going to the introduction of the speaker. So Gary Hardy, he's going to actually present the webinar, and he's the lead architect and master trainer of the ITpreneurs COBIT portfolio, among others. Gary has a lot of experience, if I may say, 30 years in the IT industry, and he's recognized globally as an expert and thought leader in IT governance, risk management, and performance improvement. He's a long-standing member of ISACA. He's one of the lead authors of the COBIT standard about 19 years ago, I think. Past board member, UK chapter president, and a regional vice president. A lot of fancy titles, Gary. So over the next hour, Gary will explain our approach to solid COBIT5 Foundation training. What do people really need to know to learn to effectively work with COBIT? And he will go into the details of the COBIT5 Foundation training course, syllabus, and the exam. So at this point, I would like to hand it over to you, Gary.
Greetings, everybody. Nice to be able to do this webinar today for you. I'm based in Cape Town, sitting in a really hot room at the moment, so I'm not sure what the weather's like where you are. Let me just quickly go through basically what I want to try and cover today. Quite a bit of this is really discussing the whole approach to what kind of training we need and what, from my experience, users expect from COBIT. And obviously we've got some people today who are brand new to COBIT, as well as some that have used COBIT before. So we're going to talk a little bit about what COBIT5 is, especially for the new people, just to give you a feeling and an introduction to what's special about COBIT5 compared to previous versions. We'll talk about the syllabus that's been established for the COBIT5 Foundation, because I guess everyone, well, hopefully everyone is aware that this is a new initiative, in the sense that APMG have been appointed the accreditation body for COBIT5 and COBIT training. And this is the first time that's ever happened. We've never had in the past like an accredited scheme. So for the first time we have an official syllabus, and I'll be talking about that and some comments I have and how that relates to what we are providing as training. I'll also talk a little bit about the exam, and then towards the end we'll talk about other courses that are likely to come through later this year. As Lauren said, please ask questions. You can post questions and register, comments through the chat window. And at the end, we should have some time for some live questions as well. So I hope we can make this interactive. And I suppose the essence of this, look at my own personal kind of passion with this topic, and the reason why I've become and became very interested in the education around COBIT, was really in the earlier years the frustration of meeting too many people who had just picked up one or two of the COBIT books and had understood, well, they thought they had understood what COBIT was about, but in reality had only skimmed the surface or picked only one particular part of the COBIT material. And this slide talks about a fool remains a fool if he's using a tool inappropriately. The other slogan I tend to use is, best practice is only as good as the people that use it. And so if we haven't got the right kind of people understanding this and using the practices, not just COBIT but ITIL and all the other practices properly, then the value of those best practices really is seriously diminished. So from my perspective, understanding COBIT materials and going through a foundation training class obviously is not intended to be becoming a super expert or trying to teach all of the advanced angles, but it should equip those people with sufficient knowledge to understand how to use and apply the COBIT material in practice, be able to discuss with others what the content of COBIT is all about, and then be able to apply it at work as a foundation. So Lawrence, the next slide.
All right, so we had another poll at this point. Please take a few seconds to see what are your biggest challenges in your organizations. People are voting, 30% of the people. All right, interesting. It seems like most people have a fairly big challenge with the management buy-in option. All right, I'm closing the poll. I'll share the results just for you to see them all. So most people have trouble with the management buy-in, Gary. Back to you.
Yeah, and that ties in with my own view, because I hope you'll see, those of you who are new to COBIT will realize that COBIT is at a high level. IT governance is by its definition at a high level, and one of the challenges is getting management at the high level to actually buy into this and drive it from the top. So it's one of the fundamental challenges of understanding COBIT is to be able to articulate the COBIT message to the right level of person, which is generally management and business people rather than technical people. So okay, let's move on. This slide just gives you a kind of chronology and a history of how COBIT has developed over the years. So we're now in the 5th version, and originally the purpose of the COBIT material was to provide a common language for audit, management, and in fact business people as well around, so what is good practice for IT, rather than relying on the opinion of a whole variety of auditors, from the big firms, and even between the big firms, potentially different opinions, to individual consultants, to individual auditors, to internal auditors. So the whole concept originally, up to about the year 2000, was driving a model of good practice that could be understood by IT and business people, and would be based on accepted good practice. So through the analysis of all the various standards and best practices, provide a one-stop shop almost for all of that guidance in one model at a very high level. Then around 2007, 2008, the notion of IT governance became a kind of hot topic, and has become a bit of a buzzword, to be honest. But it's all to do with the fact that around that time there was more and more recognition that IT needed to have a much greater business engagement, that there was a much greater need for business understanding of how IT could enable the performance of an enterprise, and that the challenge really was seen as a lack of that engagement. So a lack of involvement by senior people, a lack of involvement by business people, and a lot of mystique around IT in general amongst non-IT people. So the benefit of the COBIT material being easy to follow and in plain language, combined with that kind of pressure and understanding in the marketplace, led to this whole topic of IT governance. And so the COBIT material that went into COBIT 4 and then 4.1 brought in the whole governance topic and included governance practices. And then I think the realization when we began COBIT5, and by the way, these versions are typically 3 to 4 year life cycles. So COBIT5 came out in 2012, but actually the project began in 2009. The realization for COBIT5 was that we need to make it much clearer in terms of what governance means and what management means, and we need to update the material to be truly a proper governance framework. And I'll explain in a moment some of those key features. Obviously in this webinar I can't go through the whole, concept of COBIT5, but I'm just going to give you the highlights. So we talk about COBIT5 being one single integrated framework, and that particular point is really, there's two sides to that particular point. One is that within ISACA itself, there became a proliferation of guidance materials. So COBIT was always like the anchor framework, but some of you may have heard of Val IT, and then there was Risk IT, and then there was an auditors framework, and then even a security framework known as BMIS. And the conclusion was this was getting too complicated. Although the research was very valuable, the problem was that people were getting confused. It was just too much to swallow. So COBIT5, one of the key development activities in COBIT5 was to consolidate all of that material into the one new COBIT5 framework. So all of the very smart research work on Val IT, which is value management, was brought into the COBIT5 model at a much easier to comprehend level, and the same is true of Risk IT and the other things. The other aspect of this is that we try to promote the notion that there is only one governance framework in an enterprise, and that includes the argument that we shouldn't make IT governance some parallel frame of reference, because the danger will be that we'll just promote and prolong the notion that IT is somehow separate to the way an enterprise works. So the single framework argument is having one approach for governance that includes IT, and one model from ISACA that drives and supports that. The other points on this slide talk to, or the one on the left, which is really it's always been the case, is alignment with other relevant frameworks. So COBIT, if you haven't realized that, is based on the analysis of all the best practices and standards that are out there. Originally 57 were used. Now it must be up to 70 plus, and every version is a refresh of the latest. So for example, ITIL, during the development it was ITIL version 3, then it became ITIL 2011. So there's always, and it's never ending, catch up and a realignment. The enterprise coverage, which I'll talk about again in a second, is one of the most fundamental adjustments. So the COBIT5 model has really emphasized that this is not a model just for the IT function, or that IT and IT processes mean just for the IT function. It's a model for the enterprise's use of IT in the enterprise, and even beyond the enterprise. So all of the processes in COBIT are enterprise-wide, business and IT functional activities. So one of the examples I often use, especially for guys who are probably on this call who are from an ITIL background, change management, which is a key process, now is the change of business process as well as infrastructure applications and the technologies. And the other kind of key change has been the move to a new assessment method based on the 15504 standard, which I'll touch on as well a little bit later. Okay, Lawrence? So the enterprise-wide perspective means that the COBIT5 model, which has been based on, as I say, the latest guidance, so includes governance standards and governance thinking, as well as IT best practices and of course non-IT best practices like project management, has now presented one view of all the processes that would take place in an enterprise where IT is part of the equation. And interestingly, as that model evolved and as we were building the materials, frequently IT ended up being dropped from the title. So for example, rather than talk about managing IT strategy, we talk about strategy. For continuity, it used to be IT service continuity, now it's business continuity. And in fact, the majority of the process titles do not have IT in the title, because in today's enterprise, and we talk about the pervasiveness of IT in today's enterprises, IT is just simply part of everything that we do. So if we ought to accept that that's the case. And so when we're talking about best practice and how to govern and manage IT, what we're really talking about is how to govern and manage the enterprise with IT in mind. It's a very subtle but very important distinction. So you'll see when you get into the COBIT material that the process model is seriously different to the previous process model. I mean, we've got new processes. It looks similar, there's a new domain for governance, but all of the processes have been reworked top to bottom, end to end, to give complete coverage. So that's an important thing to remember. Next slide. So currently there are 3 core publications. What's known as the COBIT5 framework, then what's known as the COBIT5 enabling processes guide, and the COBIT5 implementation guide. Previous users of COBIT who remember COBIT 4.1, that's very similar to the COBIT5 enabling processes guide. So this is the book that contains all the process guidance, and behind every process all the best practices. And this is the book that everyone uses day by day as the reference book for good practice. The COBIT5 framework is a definition and a description of what COBIT5 is, and includes what are known as the COBIT5 enablers, all of the things that can enable good governance. And I'm calling this the theory because it is really the theory of the COBIT model. And then the COBIT5 implementation book is something that's been around for a long time, but thankfully was now kind of identified as a core book and given more prominence, because historically a lot of people didn't even know this book existed. So the COBIT5 implementation book is the methodology for driving continual improvement of IT governance using COBIT as the source, as well as all the other best practices. For ITIL guys, it's very similar to the 5th book, the Continuous Improvement Lifecycle book of ITIL, and it's based around a commonly accepted continuous improvement lifecycle. But it emphasizes the importance of wrapping around that proper program management as a program of work delivering business value, and includes change enablement as a stream, because it's been recognized by everybody that enabling change and influencing senior people and even changing culture is a key component of making the use of COBIT successful in the implementation of IT governance. Okay. So from my experience, and look, I suppose my own personal experience has been a combination of doing educational programs. So I've probably trained now upwards of 1,000 people over the years, including, by the way, more and more business people, combined with consulting work, which increasingly is more and more to do with implementation and less to do with assessments. It's the trend now is let's get moving with implementation, and let's use assessment as a way to identify gaps and come up with an implementation plan, as opposed to doing heavy assessments that are akin to an audit or an opinion type of an assessment. And so I find that the users of COBIT who are now in that situation, whether they're in an enterprise or whether they are consultants or advisors or even auditors, need to understand the fullness of this topic. So the scope that we drive on our training is initially positioning all of this in the context of a typical enterprise. So we begin with describing and discussing typical challenges and issues, what in the COBIT material are called pain points and trigger events, things that are driving management's concern and may be seen as management problems, which typically then become the drivers behind the desire to actually do something and make a change and drive from the top a commitment to transforming the effectiveness of the governance and then management of IT. Then understanding what we mean by IT governance and management, because those topics are loosely used and not always well understood. And it's not that every country or every sector has exactly the same meanings, but it's important that we at least get on a reasonably sound footing in terms of what they do mean and on a good understanding of that. So we include that kind of explanation and learning. And then we're into COBIT5 itself, what the framework is, what we see as the scope of the COBIT material, what the key concepts are. In COBIT5 language, what the principles of the COBIT5 framework are and what the enablers are, the different things that can enable good governance. And these are various things like skills, organizational structures, policies, and so forth, as well as process. But then we include good discussion around the process model and the process guidance, because in reality that is what everyone uses. The only guidance truly from ISACA that you can use in detail is the process guidance. And indeed, the process guidance drives all of the other enablers as well. So we include good coverage of that. And then we have a good discussion around the assessment method. The assessment method is a completely new departure from the previous assessment method. Both are sort of maturity assessment methods. Previously, it was based around the CMM type way of thinking. Now it's based around the ISO 15504 process capability assessment model. And so, you know, for people who have used COBIT before, this is quite a challenge because of investment in a previous way of thinking. And so we in our training, we cover both the old and the new methods, and we discuss the impact on old users of COBIT4 and how they can transition to the new method, and also how they could even carry on using the old method with COBIT5 if they wish. Okay, Lawrence? So let's move on now to the official syllabus. And so this is the first time there has been an official syllabus properly organized. From my side, it's not ideal. I find, in my view, is that it's a little bit too focused on the theory, and indeed even memorizing certain theoretical facts. This syllabus shows you where the percentage of the questions are in the exam in relation to the syllabus, and it's heavily oriented towards the enablers and the principles. Obviously, quite an emphasis on the capability model, which is the new process assessment scheme, but you'll notice nothing focused on the process or the process model or the processes book. So this is a little bit of a challenge. The exam is only focused on the framework book and the outline of the assessment scheme, and that is the only reference for the exam and indeed officially for the course. So if we move on to what we're doing, so what we have basically done is put together a classroom course that we feel covers what we believe to be the key understandings of the terminology, the basic concepts and the core principles of COBIT5, as I said before, to equip people with an understanding of how to understand and use COBIT in practice. Obviously, we need and we must include coverage of the material that's necessary for the exam, but we have basically decided to add more than just the core material. So I think it's probably fair to say that our course is probably quite a lot different to most other providers of this training, in that we go beyond the foundation basic curriculum. It can be a 2 or 3 day class, and I'll come on to that. So in my view, if we're going to use training to equip people to get the value from the COBIT materials, we need something which helps them adopt these good practices in a sustainable and properly supported way. We know it's going to help them, well, it needs to help them use the material to actually add value in their enterprises or for their clients or their customers or even their audit clients. So the understanding, even at the foundation level, should be sufficient to be able to explain what that path is and what the organizational changes are that are needed, and how the skills that are required, through the COBIT material training can help equip people to, get their organizations up to speed with better governance, better management over time. It's a long process and it isn't done overnight, but the educational approach, in my mind, must help people understand how to do that. Okay? So Lawrence, go back to you.
Yeah, we'll do another quick poll to see what's the most important driver to do COBIT5 training for you, for your organization. So we're opening up now. So please take a moment to vote. And it seems that most people want to learn COBIT from scratch, which is very interesting. So
Yep.
A lot of new people we found out earlier to the COBIT industry, and that doesn't surprise me, because now with COBIT5 and APMG also promoting it, there's a lot more attention and momentum for COBIT, and it's going to grow a lot. So it's interesting.
Lawrence,
okay,
what is the actual?
yeah, I'm closing it. I'm sharing the
Okay.
results now, so it's 50-50 almost, or 40-40.
Yeah. That's good. So look, yeah, my belief is that, and absolutely, I seriously believe that people who, anyone who's done COBIT4 training in the past ought to do COBIT5 training, because it is a bit, there's a lot of difference, and I think also there are people, I'm afraid, who did COBIT4 training that were never trained as effectively perhaps as they should have been. So so that's interesting. Yeah, that ties in with my own view of what's going on. That's good. Okay, so let's just describe here how we go about our training. We've called this a Foundation Plus approach because it is more than just Foundation, but it is obviously a Foundation class. And so what we try to make sure we've covered in this training material, in addition to being able to understand what you need to understand to pass the exam, is a proper understanding of the context of COBIT in an enterprise, what we call the IT challenges, and how governance is important in dealing with those challenges, and that leads on to why there is a value in using the COBIT material. So it's trying to make sure that everyone who attends these classes appreciates the purpose of COBIT, what it's there to help achieve, and not just the functionality of what COBIT is. The issue of stakeholders and the issue of strategic alignment is a very, very valuable component of the COBIT guidance, and is a key part of the process material. It's basically how to align the importance of process to business needs and business objectives, as well as pain points and risks that have been suffered in the past. And that's known in the COBIT sort of lingo as the goals cascade. And it's all to do with aligning and understanding the role of stakeholders. So this is another key area that's very, very important. And then, as I said, and I've mentioned already, of course, the importance of the process model. So in our training, we introduce the process model. We introduce the type of processes that are in the process model. Obviously, we're not going to teach the detail of every process or try and go down in great depth, but we do go through all of the processes and explain the objective of every process and the type of scope it covers. And then we pay quite a lot of attention to the content of every process, which is standard content, and includes, in addition to best practice, so practices and what are now called activities. COBIT4 users will remember control objectives and what we'll call control practices. Those are now known as practices and activities. And very important features like RACI charts, which are very, very popular and help organize roles, responsibilities. And then obviously we talk about the assessment approach, but we do put it in the context of, so what does this mean for COBIT4 users? What do COBIT4 users need to do to transition to the new method? And how can they, if they wish, carry on using a CMM approach, even if you're adopting COBIT5, which is certainly possible and popular. Okay. So in terms of 2 or 3 days, and look, I think the experience has been that obviously some people find it difficult to give 3 days. Some people, when they do want to take an exam, they want to have some time to consider the material and do an exam even at a later date. Some people want to do the exam immediately after the training. So what we have done is provide a 3-day class, which is sort of the optimal class for doing the training and the exam. So we have provided a lot of time to absorb the materials. On the 3rd day, a lot of that time is given over to allowing for some revision, for doing some practice exam test questions, for discussing with the trainer any issues that they're not sure about, so that when the exam is taken on the 3rd day, they've had a sufficient time to prepare properly. So the exam, because it's focused on the framework book and the syllabus is clearly, everyone can have sight of what that syllabus is. It focuses on certain sections of that framework book. It puts a lot of focus on what are called the enabler appendices. These are sections of the framework book that describe each enabler, things like frameworks and policies, skills and competencies, things like that. All the different enablers. There's 7 of those that COBIT has defined to be the range of things that you need to drive to get complete coverage of enterprise governance. So the exam asks questions about very detailed points in those appendices. Unfortunately, some of them are simply a memorization of just simply memorizing certain key facts. So the exam preparation does require careful study of the content of that book, in addition to going through the class and doing, the exercises. So the 2-day class is more focused on doing the normal training. It does allow for, as an option, doing the exam at the very end. My own experience has been that that's unusual, and typically if you do a 2-day class, I found, at least from my experience, that the exam then is something that's organized on a subsequent date. The 3-day class is the one that's recommended if we, if the goal is to do the full training and include the exam. Okay. So just so you can see, how we approach this. This is just a list of the modules on a couple of slides. So obviously, having had an introduction at the beginning and getting everyone to understand their different backgrounds, we have this opening module which talks to typical challenges in every enterprise and how governance and management is necessary, or how that links back to overcoming typical management challenges. We then introduce COBIT at a very high level, so which includes understanding really what governance means, what management means in the way COBIT has defined it, and kind of an overview of the COBIT framework. We have 4 assignments or practical exercises in the class, 2 on the first day, 2 on the second day, or third day, depending on the timing. And these are based around a fictitious case study known as Colwick. When we run these in-house, we typically align it more to the in-house enterprise, so it's made much more relevant. And so the first assignment talks to, what are the challenges in the case study. Then we talk about the enablers, and this one we have to dwell on in some detail because of the exam. And then move on to stakeholder needs, which introduces the whole goals cascade approach, and how stakeholders help to drive enterprise objectives, and how those objectives and those needs need to be considered when focusing on where to use COBIT in practice and which processes are important. Because basically this is very important in the context of scoping where to actually put effort, and is one of the key tools in the COBIT approach and even the governance approach that even cascades onto the implementation of other best practices. And I think, I don't know if you spotted in the introduction, but one of the things I've recently created, and it's going to be published later this year, is the ITIL COBIT interface guide. And this is how COBIT can help drive from a business end down a focus on service management and a buy-in on service management from a business perspective, and how to focus and scope service management improvement using ITIL with business objectives in mind. So it plays heavily to this particular point. Then we introduce the enabling processes, so the overview of the process model and describing the fundamental principle of the full enterprise approach, the end-to-end coverage, and why that's important from a business perspective. And then if we go to the next slide, we then have another assignment that uses the stakeholder concerns and the IT governance principles from the COBIT model to help understand how those would apply in practice to the case study or to the in-house enterprise environment if we're doing an in-house approach. Then we have a couple more models that go through the processes in more depth. So the number 7 basically goes through every process and explains the scope of every process at a high level. And then the 8th module goes through, for one process, the components completely, so that the users understand the value of the process practices, the process activities, what are known as inputs and outputs for every process, and key deliverables from every process or artifacts, and the RACI charts, which provide guidance for every practice, for every process, in terms of who are the role players, who's responsible, who's accountable, and so forth. And everyone who's been working in the governance space has concluded that if there's one key weakness that drives nearly all of the governance and management problems, it's a lack of accountability and a lack of ownership and a lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. It's almost the root cause of pretty well every weakness. And so, we feel it's very important that principle be understood and the value of the RACI charts be explained. And the last part of the components are what are known as the goals and metrics. So it's suggested process goals and metrics, which tie back to IT goals and metrics, which then tie back to enterprise goals and metrics. And this has always been a key feature of the COBIT model to help drive good performance management. And then the last module explains the new process capability method, the 15504 method, and explains the old method, how that, the reason why there's a difference between the old and new method and the reason why they are completely different, and then explains for people who are familiar with the old method how that would affect them, and if they want to carry on with the old method, how they could do that. So if the class is full of people who are not COBIT4 users, then typically that would be dropped. It's kind of unnecessary to explain all of that. And then the rest of the class is exam prep and practice. Okay. So in terms of ITpreneurs materials, and this is typical for all ITpreneurs courses, there's an instructor guide and a student guide. So the instructor guide and the student guide are similar. The only difference is that the instructor guide obviously guides the instructor in terms of how to organize assignments and how to facilitate the interaction with the students. Both guides contain obviously the slides, but also contain what we call speaker notes. And those speaker notes serve two purposes. They help obviously the presenter, but they're there also to provide more content for the learners as a record of the detail on that particular slide's topic, and just help avoid cluttering up the slides with too much detail. So typically the slide talks to the key points and uses diagrams and so forth to explain the point that's being communicated, and then the speaker notes support the detail behind that. So the student and the instructor have identical material from that perspective. We think that's the best way to do things. There's a sample exam, which is the standard sample exam. So that's used obviously for practicing the exam. The syllabus for the course and the exam are part of the materials. That's freely available to everybody, so there's no mystique around what the official syllabus is focused upon in terms of topics and where the references are in terms of the COBIT books that support the syllabus. There's a first aid kit, which is just a handy reference of key facts that we've always done with most of our classes, and so there's a COBIT5 first aid kit, and obviously all those materials are there for instructors to use to help drive their classes. Okay. So look, we're coming to the end now of what I wanted to talk about, and I just wanted to share, these are just a few of the comments I've had back from the people who've been on my classes, which have always made me it's like reinforcing every time my own feelings about all of this. So over the years I've been doing this, it's now, let me think, it's coming up to 10 years. It's like, I think compared to ITIL training or Prince2 training or any of the other best practice training, the difference with COBIT is that for most people, the concepts are new. It's not technically difficult, it's just conceptually different. And so understanding these concepts and working on a much higher level, is new. And so, and also that there's more to the COBIT material than just what people used to call just the control objectives. It's a broader set of guidance materials than a lot of people have realized, including the implementation methods. The business side of this is very interesting. And I think I mentioned at the beginning that I've been increasingly doing this with business people and very senior business people, and internally in the Deloitte firm where I work, increasingly the non-IT sort of audit guys, more the business risk people, and the IT people increasingly come to realize this is really business guidance around how do you use IT effectively, And for business people, to some extent, they find it even easier to understand than sometimes IT guys, because there's no baggage, there's no preconceived notion. They just see this as common sense, logical, and practical. But the practical application is very important. So, we try to make sure that what we're doing here and the way we train our trainers and the way we convey this whole package is a focus on practical application and understanding the fundamentals to help people, achieve that. Okay? Okay, so let's move on to the exam. So the exam is a multiple choice question-based exam. It's 50 multiple choice questions done in 40 minutes. Can be done either on paper or over the internet. Can be proctored, physically or virtually proctored, so remote proctoring. And the pass mark is 50%. So you need to get people need to get half those questions correct. And I've already mentioned that we've got obviously sample exam and guidance in the course materials. Going forward, according to the information we've been given from APMG, and as far my intelligence on the from an ISACA point of view, is that this is the immediate plan in terms of courses and development of those courses. So we've talked about the foundation class, which is the fundamentals. There will be an implementation class. There was an implementation class in the past, so there will be, I hope, a similar syllabus for that. That syllabus has yet to be announced, which is basically, a course on the methodology for applying COBIT. And then there will be an assessor training class. Now, just to explain this briefly, and this is also something that hasn't yet been announced, but the intent that ISACA have, and one of the reasons why they wanted to bring in the new 15504 approach, was to enable certified assessors. So individuals who would need to go through a program of training and examination and possibly even experience to be able to be accredited officially as a COBIT5 assessor. So this is something entirely new. We've never had this in the past. And so that training program is aimed at those people. There is in the COBIT assessor guide materials, there's a whole separate set of books that's the 15504 assessment approach. Part of that set of materials is a self-assessment guide, which is what will be used by individuals in an enterprise to do these assessments. And it's not clear yet. My understanding is that the assessor class will not be aimed at the self-assessment marketplace. So the self-assessment technique is probably going to be part of the implementation class, but we're still waiting for the syllabus for both those training materials to be announced. Okay. We did put together some time ago a very short online module that just explains in an hour or so the overview of what COBIT5 is, and this is free and freely available. So we just felt this was, well, just a good awareness tool and to some extent a marketing tool from our side. So this is available freely. So please feel free to use this and to pass this on to others if you want to get a quick overview, in an hour or two of what the COBIT material is. And this obviously is a self-paced little e-learning module. Okay, so look, just to wrap up before we move on to questions, just go back to my own, well, this slide, a fool is a fool, a fool with a tool is still a fool, or looking at it from another perspective, good practice is only as good as the people that use it. So, obviously our focus and our whole approach here is to try to equip the users of COBIT to have sufficient knowledge to add value when they're using COBIT and know how COBIT is meant to be used and how to use it either in their enterprises or as an advisor or as a consultant. So I think we've got maybe 10 minutes max for some questions. I hope there will be some questions.
Right, Gary.
Please feel free.
Thank you very much. We're getting some questions actually all along your presentation. So thanks for your wonderful presentation so far. So APMG recommends a 2 or 3 day course. So I think APMG doesn't actually make a recommendation. They give just a fact sheet and the advice to take the course, but not how long it should be. It's only what modules should be in there, what topics should be covered. But we recommend a 3 day course.
Yeah.
Can the syllabus and example exams be found at the APMG website, or is it only handed out via an ATO? That's correct. It's only handed out via an ATO. So if you take a training course from an official training provider who is accredited, such as Global Knowledge or any other, then you will definitely get the full access to the syllabus, sample exams, and whatever is available from the APMG site. This question is maybe for you, Gary. So are the COBIT manuals needed for the foundation course, or is the materials for the course, for the training course, just sufficient?
I think the COBIT5 framework book is needed, and what's known as a supplementary guide for the assessment scheme. So the COBIT5 framework is freely available to everybody. It's a freely downloadable PDF, and the supplementary guide is something we include in our materials. And the reason I say this is because although we have included in our slides and in the speaker notes the content and the detail of all the things that are needed in relation to the syllabus, for a revision purpose, I find it's much easier to actually go to the sections of the book and just refresh those sections. Otherwise, you have to hunt back through the slide pack. So the course covers all the content. We try to make sure that we explain in the training all those key facts, but from a revision perspective, my recommendation is to use the framework book and go to those, and the syllabus points to the exact sections of the book that are used for the exam. And it's just unfortunate from my side that too many of the questions, look, and I've done the exam myself, so I know, too many of the questions I think are memory tests of content of that book. So I just tell it as it is basically and recommend that be done.
Okay, that's useful information, Gary. Thanks. There's a question about extra time for non-native English-speaking people in the world. So yes, people will get 15 extra minutes if they apply for this at least 2 weeks in advance of the exam. So not on the day itself. So this is very strict. So you have to actually apply for it beforehand.
Yeah, and look, I would say that for non-English speakers, that's another good reason to carefully study the book and give time for that, because it is obviously more difficult for a non-English speaker to understand the questions and understand the content. So yeah.
All right. There's a question: how does one request access to the free online session that we just showed? So I'm showing a screen which has our email addresses. So if you would send me an email address, then I will give you access to that online e-learning, let's say, awareness course. It's not really a course; it's more an overview. But just drop me a message. I have done previous COBIT 4.1 version foundation. Should I do the regular course and exam for COBIT5?
So basically, should he redo COBIT Foundation?
Yes.
Yeah. Look, in my opinion, yes, because there's a lot of differences between COBIT 4 and 5. It doesn't mean it's like everything that evolves. It's not that everything you've done before is lost. It's just that there are a lot of new concepts and new features. And my view, for the sake of 2 days training, I think it is very important to do it. Yeah. If your role is, if you're kind of someone who's focused, I guess even listening to this webinar probably means you are, interested in the topic. So if you take the topic seriously, I think it does need, to do it again.
Right. Is it mandatory to take a course to take the exam, in order to take the exam? No, it is not. So you can also self-study, choose to do that. But like Gary has explained, it's a lot of different materials, different books. It's a lot of theory, and then again, you need probably some guidance on how to actually use that theory. So we always strongly recommend to get an official, accredited training course. Because what did you say again, Gary? A best practice is only as good as the people using it.
Yeah, look, and to be very frank, people who know me know I tell it as it is. The exam and you probably guessed from, pick this up in the way I presented this, that the exam and the syllabus, unfortunately, are testing quite a lot of theory, a good chunk of which in practice isn't actually used or isn't that important, but doesn't include a lot of stuff that you ought to know if you want to apply COBIT in practice. So if all you're interested in is a piece of paper, then fine, just do the exam. But if your goal is to understand COBIT and be able to apply it as a practice, then really I recommend doing the training. And the exam obviously is a way of focusing people to pay attention. But the way the current syllabus has been structured, it's not covering all the things that I believe should be understood. So, that's the way it is.
Okay.
Currently.
So, Gary, why has there been a delay in the production of the other COBIT books, I would say, materials? Do you know that?
Okay, well, let me explain where so the 3 books I mentioned at the beginning are the core 3 books. Another book was published last July, which is known as COBIT5 for Security. So this is the pattern going forward. So the COBIT5 for Security book, which is extremely good, by the way, basically takes the process book, and it's exactly pretty well the same as the process book, but now for every process has security-related activities. And then at the front of the book, there's guidance on, so what is security, what does it mean, how do you explain this from a business perspective. There's a project going on right now, which is COBIT5 for Assurance, which is aimed more at the auditor community. And there's a research project going on also to do with what's known as the information model. So the core books are the base books, and the majority of people will use the core process book as the master reference book. And then over a period of time, ISACA will be developing kind of spin-off books, but they all go back to the process book. So the COBIT5 for Assurance, the COBIT5 for Security, there might be a COBIT5 for Value or a COBIT5 for Risk book. They will all be based around exactly the same model with exactly the same structure, but with additional focus on that particular subtopic. And it's just the way ISACA have to plan these things and budget them and assemble teams. It's a progression, so it was going to happen over a period of time. And I'm not sure what the current plan is actually, but all I know is that security was done, assurance is underway, it's well underway, I understand, and the information model is more of a research exercise. So I think we need to see how that research unfolds before any deliverables get determined.
Right. And do you know who in the enterprise world is talking about COBIT? Any of the major business schools?
I don't, like, for me in the enterprise world, it's not, for me, it's not so much the business schools, it's more the bodies. Look, and I think everyone knows I'm based here in South Africa, which just happens to be a little unusual as it happens, in that this topic is taken very seriously here. So in this country, it's all being driven via what's known as the Institute of Directors and so corporate governance guidance so it's more coming out of the business community through their governance bodies as well as from the government. So the government here have issued national policies and guidelines, and the private sector has done it through a corporate governance code. In other countries, it's kind of odd that South Africa is a little bit unusual with this, and there's perhaps, probably is a step ahead of a lot of other places. In terms of, I don't see yet this really strongly coming through from business schools. I wish it was. If there's something I'm unaware of, I'd love to know about it. It's gradually getting into the agenda for IT, training and obviously audit and accounting training and degrees and so forth have included this for some time. So the enterprise, the thing that I'm focused on totally is it's all to do with board awareness. It's the senior management executive level awareness of this topic, and in their particular community, the recognition of this is important, and so it can depend on sectors as well, like health and so on. Will have a focus. Same in finance. But any intelligence on that, anyone? Yeah, it'd be nice to know.
Here's a question about the certification path for the assessor course. So I'm just going back real quickly to that diagram, and as you can see, the foundation is always a prerequisite for any advanced course, but then, you know, within the advanced course, you can, it's not like there's a path. At this point, they haven't announced like a master or anything, so the advanced levels is just the implementation and the assessor, and you can take them both or you can take them separately, but you will need the foundation, even though you're already 4.1 foundation certified or 4.1 advanced certified. So they haven't really communicated anything about that, but we are actually in the process of developing a one-day virtual blended course for those who are already 4.1 foundation certified and who are interested in getting into the implementation course for COBIT5, but they are seeking, let's say, a fast track to get into there, because they basically need to update their knowledge and they need to pass the foundation exam just before they can start the implementation. So that's going to be a one-day virtual course or two sessions of 4 hours with some self-study, passing the exam, and then 2 weeks later probably getting into the implementation class. But we'll communicate more about that later on once we have finalized the design of that. Is there increased alignment with ISO 38000? It's a question here.
Do you mean 38500?
38500, yes. Sorry.
Yeah. So 38500, yeah, absolutely. So ISO 38500, which was published in 2008, is the ISO standard for IT governance, and so that was the standard that was used to define in the new process model the governance, what's known as the governance so-called area or domain. So if you're familiar with ISO 38500, it talks to what are known as evaluate, direct, and monitor approaches. And so in COBIT5, the governance layer, which is this higher level domain of 5 processes, all have evaluate, direct, and monitor practices. So that domain was aligned exactly with the ISO standard. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, we're running out of time. We're already past the hour. So all of the other questions coming in, we'll address them separately by email, or please, again, use our contact details to send us any additional questions that you may have after thinking about this webinar or maybe rewatching it. So thank you very much for joining, to all the people who participated in this webinar. We hope that you are all very inspired to follow the COBIT5 Foundation training and to also see how that will improve your daily skills, you know, in your work, and to improve working with COBIT and the enterprise, let's say, alignment with IT. So thank you, Gary, for your time and for your interesting presentation. And
pleasure.
Yeah, if nothing else, then I would like to close the webinar by now.
Okay, thanks everyone. Keep in touch.